This time on Watchers of Tomorrow, Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the USS Enterprise.
Hello everyone, welcome to Watchers of Tomorrow, the sci-fi review and critique show that everyone knew was a bad idea that would never work out from the start. My name is Gep, and I'm joined as always by my friend and co-host Dr. Isix.
Hi!
And now we are finally there. Thing that basically every friend I have who I talked to about doing this show was like, oh, do some Next Generation episodes.
And we will, and we're going to, and we're about to, we're starting.
We did it. We finally did. I'm honestly glad that we spent this long getting to my favorite series, because if we'd done this early on, like if I listened back to early episodes, they were bad, and I didn't know what I was doing.
Well, it's fine. You know, we gotta have to practice this sort of thing, and you know, producing 100-some episodes, I think we could say we've had some practice.
Yeah, we practiced for a couple of years, and now we're ready to tackle Star Trek: The Next Generation, which is arguably the most popular Star Trek, or at least one of the ones that cemented it as, like, it went from pop cultural icon to, like, seminal sci-fi show that defined television for at least a few decades.
Yeah, people remember who Picard, Data are. They're less so about, you know, Kira or Chakotay or, say, Sheridan from Babylon 5 or John Crichton from Farscape. You know, we might know who these people are, but the general, you know, person on the street, maybe not so much.
Yes. So it's been a long time since our old episodes, but as we did with original series, this is not a episode critique or talking about anything specific. This is going to be a general overview of the cultural landscape of the late 80s and the early production and genesis of that which would become Star Trek Next Generation.
Yes. Wait a moment. This did get started after the Genesis device was used, so maybe there's a connection there.
Yeah, there could be. There could be that. Well, we already talked about some of this because it ties into the history of the Star Trek movies, because this actually started before they were even done making all of the original series movies.
Mm-hmm.
So, original plan, which was being tossed around in like the mid to late 70s, was to create a new live-action Star Trek show called Star Trek Phase 2 that would be a direct follow-up to original series and use most of the same cast.
Yes, and so you're already sort of generating stories, getting sort of, the early work was being put in in order to get this sort of off the ground, and then it kind of didn't.
Yeah, they even had some production tests. You can look up like set tests and makeup tests. They had cast 2 additional younger crew members, one of which went on to star in the movie, to kind of bring in young blood that they could eventually replace the older actors with if they needed to.
To be that next generation, really.
And the higher-ups at Paramount decided that it wasn't worth them trying to invest in a whole TV show, but Star Trek was still popular enough that a lot of the ideas that they had for Star Trek Phase 2 wound up being used in Star Trek The Motion Picture, which then spawned all the things we've been talking about for the last 10 or so episodes.
Indeed. So it's like, wait, we could make more money off Star Trek? Hooray! Let's make some movies. After that first one did all right. So let's roll. And they did. And then...
After this, they had almost 10 years of super successful movies. And at this point, it's about 20 years after the original show aired.
So,
We've hit 1986. And this is when they start talking about how maybe they could, in fact, get away with another Star Trek TV show. Like, the time is right for another Star Trek TV show, even though we're still making all of the movies. The main issue that they hit here is that all of the original cast, one, is getting a little old to star in a sci-fi action series.
Indeed. So if you want to be having your phaser battles each week, this might not be very good for Shatner's hips.
And also, they at this point have been in dozens of movies.
Mm-hmm.
which really makes the price higher for actors.
Yeah, so you can charge more and people will actually pay it. And, well, if they don't, then it just doesn't happen.
So through a combination of budgetary restrictions and just them being kind of fed up with the old direction of the movies, the decision was made to make an entirely new show with an entirely new cast that would be set about 100 years after the original series.
So a new generation, a later generation, a next generation.
And thus we get into all of our casting and other tumultuous behind-the-scenes thing, because this wasn't an easy show to start making.
Nope. Conflicts of personalities, Gene Roddenberry wanting things to be a certain way and that being kind of confusing for people, and getting everyone, the right folks as well. And, and then things happen as they started getting things together.
Yeah, so starting with, of course, Gene Roddenberry, who came up with the original concept for the original show, had been floating around doing conventions. Everybody knew him at this point. He'd kind of developed a cult of personality around him as the Star Trek guy.
Yes, we've talked some of this already.
Yeah.
As far as, him being like, oh, instead of, we made this, I made this.
But he also did not have a particularly good relationship with the Paramount studio. Like, the executives and him didn't get along that well. He'd been pitching a ton of different series and story ideas and things, and none of them had particularly landed. And he had a very bad relationship with studio higher-ups. And the only reason that he got to still be involved was because he lawyered up and was able to argue that his original concept and things was still important enough that he should still be directly involved with any future Star Trek projects, even though technically Paramount owned the IP.
Yeah, so I have to at least have input here. Otherwise, I can yank this off and, you guys lose a bunch of money. So let me in. And they're like, fine. We're still going to have other people sort of regulating you to a certain degree, but you're going to have a say. Yeah.
And then the second thing that was happening, which happened a little bit later, but it may as well be included in the troubles portion, is Paramount started shopping this show around to people. And it wasn't going to work. Everyone knew this. This is the worst possible idea you can ever think of on paper, taking a long-running, fan-beloved, fan-driven, pop-cultural icon series, basically rebooting it with an entirely new cast, and trying to make it happen again. Everyone knew this wasn't going to work.
So I believe they call this conventional wisdom. It's like, no one's done this before. This doesn't make sense. It can't happen because it hasn't.
So basically the thing that happened was no network wanted to take on the show.
Too risky.
So generally what happens with TV, if you're not completely aware of the kind of behind the scenes thing there, is a studio like Paramount comes up with a show idea and gets all the stuff together to make it. They then basically sell it to a network that orders a certain number of episodes, and then they will be exclusively run on that network, like, UPN, CBS, any of those things. And that's why you have certain TV shows made by a studio, but debuting exclusively on a given channel.
Exactly. It means that there's multiple entities here that have to basically sign off on the process then.
So to get around no one actually wanting to buy episodes of this new show that they knew wasn't going to go anywhere, Paramount decided to fund the thing themselves and then skip the network process and send it straight into syndication, which basically means that any network can run any number of episodes they want, which is what was happening with original series, because after original series wrapped up, this usually happens when a show ends or has gotten a certain number of episodes, they send it into syndication, which means that any network can start running it as reruns, basically.
Indeed. So, effectively, the next generation was already reruns in a certain sort of dynamic here, I guess.
Yeah, and the weirdness of this is, well, this is another decision that probably shouldn't have worked. It was actually a genius move, even though it was kind of forced on them, because that is why Star Trek the original series was so popular in the first place. It wasn't popular from its original run. Very few people got that invested with it in the original run, comparatively. The reason that it had become such a giant pop cultural icon is because dozens of smaller channels had been running it in syndication for years.
Exactly. So it was accessible to people beyond, its, original home. So more people got to see it, more people got to enjoy it, and more people got to fall in love with it.
So now all of these small channels that had been making the original series popular in the first place all got to air Next Generation because it was already in syndication. So people could just continue watching Star Trek in the same place they'd already been watching Star Trek for years.
So basically we have Star Trek, and then after it, the Next Generation. One day a week, there's a new episode. Hooray!
Yeah, so it worked out in a really weird way.
Yes.
But all that comes, later on, because the show hasn't even been filmed yet at this point in what we're talking about.
So, this is a plan for when they have episodes, to basically do the syndication without having 100 episodes yet.
So, apart from Gene Roddenberry, probably the best known behind-the-scenes name of this era of Star Trek is Rick Berman, who was brought on to be the executive producer. And everyone knows his name because he's a very controversial figure in the Star Trek fandom.
Yes, I remember Leon Thomas's video, Berman Trek, gives a pretty good rundown of a lot of, his particular tropes that he is all about.
Yeah.
It's like, this is how Star Trek has to be, and here's the limits, and also we can't have it be too gay.
So he was brought on as someone that Gene Roddenberry trusted to run the show. He'd been working for Paramount for quite a while at this point. He started doing independent film production in the 60s and 70s, working with PBS on their show, The Big Blue Marble, and then later got hired on by Paramount, where he did a lot of things that you've heard of. He's done some episodes of like Cheers and Family Ties and MacGyver, and there was a mini-series called Space, which is one of the reasons that they thought of him for this science fiction project.
You've done something involving science fiction. That means you can probably do more. Go for it.
Yeah, but of course, he's not a good figure, basically. Yeah. He's incredibly conservative, won't let them run any LGBT storylines, even though this is something that people kept pushing for, including Gene Roddenberry, said that it was time to start bringing that into Star Trek in this era.
Star Trek has been, a show in the past that has kind of pushed the envelope in several things, for what it's allowed to do in that era, and we should be able to do this here, but Rick just won't let us. And sorry guys, I guess we're just not going to do that or do it well if we try.
Yeah, and one of this one, while I'm not trying to get off the hook for anything, it's difficult to know whether that was his own personal conservatism or him just being a devout kind of company man and not wanting to take any risks with Paramount's big, flagship franchise. The thing that we can say about him specifically as a person is that he is well known to be a blatant misogynist and mistreated the female cast of every one of the shows he worked with, including to the point where several people wound up quitting, which is why we know all of these behind-the-scenes stories.
It's like, if you're going to be driving people out, don't expect them to not talk about it. So, Rick, you're kind of an ass.
Yeah, so not the best person to have running the show, but he did run some of the most popular eras of Star Trek. Though it's difficult to know how much of that was because of him or how much of that was in spite of him.
I'd like to see the alternative world where, Berman was dropped early on or never got pulled on board, and to see how things would have gone. And maybe things would have been, Next Generation would have run for 10 years or something like that. Or maybe it would have only gotten 2 seasons. I don't know. But it's sort of something I would at least like to think about and, go through that dimensional portal for.
It's very difficult to know because you could never figure these things out. Change one thing and everything changes.
Dang butterfly effect.
One of the other important figures from this particular era, only for the first couple years of this show, wasn't running the whole thing for as long like Rick Berman was, but Maurice Hurley was brought on as a producer showrunner. And
indeed.
He's a bit of a weird one as well. He spent the 80s working on production for shows like The Equalizer and Miami Vice. He also wrote did a lot of TV/TV movie writing. He did the script for a Canadian movie called Firebird 2015, which is a very strange pro-oil propaganda car movie.
Oh my. That's something that sounds like it'd be on MST3K.
Yeah, I was just baffled by this. Just briefly, the plot of this is that the government has made it illegal for private citizens to use gasoline, ostensibly because of a gasoline shortage, but then it's later revealed there's no such gas shortage. They're just using it to control people and keep them from having fun with muscle cars.
Muscle cars are destroying society for realsies, guys.
Yeah, and the heroes are people who, are car rebels, and they have to bring a pro-car politician across the country to vote on legalizing gasoline again.
I might want to see that at some point, but not on a day when I feel like thinking.
Very weird thing to read the synopsis of nowadays.
Yes.
He also worked on more odd outings like Baywatch Nights and Kung Fu: The Legend Continues.
Yes.
I think we talked about Baywatch Nights at one point before. It's
yes.
Baffling.
He's technically one of the Borg voices in an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation as well. So I guess that's a thing. Maurice Hurley, Borg.
And then they also brought back a bunch of several of the bigger original series writers. One of the ones that we would know most often is DC Fontana, who was one of the head writers from this era.
Yes, she was back again to kick some ass and give us some tales here.
But there was a lot of weird controversy happening in the writers' room as well, because they couldn't really keep a head writer for the first two seasons consistently. There was a lot of miscommunication about themes and ideas, and one of the most commented on aspects of this early seasons was Gene Roddenberry enacted a rule that at this point in the future, humans would have moved beyond personal conflict, and so you can't have interpersonal conflicts on the show.
Yes.
From some of the stuff I've seen and read, it seems like this was broadly misapplied because Roddenberry's health was starting to fail at this point in his life, and he couldn't be as directly involved in the first couple seasons of the show. So other people enacted this as like a blanket no conflicts at all rule. But a lot of the stuff that Gene Roddenberry himself wrote or story concepted included some level of interpersonal conflict. So I feel like it was just a misapplied idea of like a no petty bullshit rule instead of a they're not allowed to disagree with each other at all rule.
Yeah, it's just that no one can disagree with each other at all ever makes the characters seem unhuman in some episodes. It's like people don't act like this. It gets better as the series gets on, but especially those early couple seasons, it's very much these are not real people. The actors are doing their best, but this doesn't make any sense.
This is something that we're going to comment on more as we go on, but I feel like this, as a thing that I keep hearing as a criticism, is an interesting one, because if you directly compare the social dynamics on Next Generation, the way that the crew interacts, and the social dynamics on original series, the thing that they were trying to move specifically away from was the outright antagonistic relationship that you had between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. While they could at times come off as friends ribbing each other, often they just came off as people who hated each other and had to work together.
Yeah, we're best friends, but also I hate you. Damn it, Spock. Why'd you have to be so logical?
A lot of the stuff, as we've commented on, comes off in today's context as just out-and-out racism.
Yes.
So even when you have the Next Generation crew disagreeing with each other and arguing and having discussions about the right course of action, it never gets to the level of antagonism and hatred that we actually see in original series, which is what they were trying to move away from. So I feel like that was a good pivot that was broadly misapplied by people who didn't understand it.
Yes. So we're going to swing so far the other direction that, everyone becomes bland.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or another term, beige. Which is kind of fitting for the Next Generation in a lot of ways.
So, of course, they had to get an entire new cast, and we are going to spend a long time introducing the main cast here, because we're never going to mention it again.
Yes. Should we start with Ro Laren?
All right, there's some changes and stuff that'll come up later that we're going to have to introduce when they come up. But
of course.
So, of course, first character, I'm just going through in the order that people tend to be listed. I have no idea what the order they were actually cast in was.
Mm-hmm. Neither do I.
Headlining any Star Trek franchise is the captain/commander/ensign who inexplicably wound up in charge, depending on what we're talking about. And in this era, of course, we have Captain Jean-Luc Picard, played very memorably by Sir Patrick Stewart.
Stewart has a long list of credits to his name. He's been in theater. He was commented as being an unknown Shakespearean actor by somebody in the early days of the production. And I think Levar Burton put a poster up on his door saying exactly that.
Yeah.
Sort of to make fun of that, sort of like, no, this guy's actually like legit. He's been in stuff. I Claudius and Dude and things like that, you know?
Yeah, but while he was like decently well known in theater circles in England, and he was very, very good at it. But in the US, he was basically completely unknown, which is interesting when you look back on the show and think about just the amount of star power that he has now.
Yes. It's gone from zero to all of it.
Yeah, he had like some scattered US TV appearances, a couple of film roles like Dune, but nothing too major. And
what about Excalibur?
Oh yeah, that too. Oof. And he was so unknown that they didn't even know about him to consider him for the part until he was coincidentally seen by one of the producers giving a literary reading.
I'm like, this guy seems like he might be the right sort of fella for this.
And of course, everyone will get on me if I don't mention that Gene Roddenberry did not want to cast him because he thought that baldness would have been cured in the future.
Gene. Yeah. In the future, if people are supposedly this evolved, they're not going to care about being bald.
Yeah, we cured it by stopping being so uptight about it.
Exactly. I do believe there's a story, though, about, we have to get this actor past some executive producers or higher-ups and the Paramount people here. Put this toupee on Patrick Stewart, and we'll hope for the best. And it's like, okay, later, it's like, well, you get the job, but never, ever wear that horrible toupee again.
Well, the version that I heard was that they had him audition. Gene Roddenberry said no. He was completely overruled. And they had him audition again with a toupee. Roddenberry was a little more okay with it, but everyone was like, take that stupid thing off. And then he auditioned a third time, and they were able to convince him.
It's like, all right, this guy's actually it. All right, let's go.
And famously, of course, he didn't know whether he wanted to take the part because he was a British stage actor, and he didn't know anything about American television. And his agent talked him into signing a standard 6-year contract, which he didn't necessarily want to commit to because this show is going to fail in a month. So you may as well get paid and go home.
Yeah. So, you'll get some money and it'll fall apart and then you don't have to worry about this anymore. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on in this year.
Yes. and oh crap, my show's been successful. I should be a worse actor.
But of course, even the other actors tend to agree that Patrick Stewart's performance as Picard and the just Shakespearean gravitas he's able to bring to even the most ridiculous situation is one of the only reasons this show worked for the first 2 seasons at all.
It's like, here are our grounding for this nonsense, so good luck.
All right, next up I guess I'm going in rank order now, is Jonathan Frakes, who plays William T. Riker.
And his beard.
At times. Though not at the time.
Yes.
Again, almost a completely unknown actor at the time. Had been playing Captain America at Marvel conventions since the 70s and transitioned to some stage work in New York and some slightly longer running spots on 70s and 80s soap operas and some very minor roles in something like, Dukes of Hazzard and things like that. But now he's pretty well known as the guy from Star Trek, some sci-fi stuff, and he mostly has transitioned into directing.
Indeed. He was on Fantasy Island, which was kind of surprising. the older actors, sure, but Charles Frakes?
Yeah, getting to work with Ricardo Montalban. Though Fantasy Island was not as long ago as we tend to think it is, just because it was before we were born.
Late 70s was his particular appearance there. He was also on Gargoyles in the 90s.
Yeah.
It's Xanatos.
So like everyone, he's moved on to be very well known and do a lot of very well known things, but of course he was almost completely unknown at the time.
Yes. So Jonathan Frakes, Star Trek is kind of like your thing, but also acting, and you're a pretty dang good actor too.
And then we'll get into it later, but of course, famously, he was unbearded for the first couple of seasons, and then the TV trope page for growing the beard is where you want to look into there, if you want to read about that before we get to it.
And we've technically talked about when he lost the beard as well.
We have. It works. It bookends.
Yes, though in Lower Decks he has it back, which,
good decision.
I guess kind of goes with, how ridiculous things are, that it's like, all right, in order to even survive, I need Riker to have a beard.
Next we have Brent Spiner, who plays Commander Data.
He's some sort of android.
Yeah. Some sort of android. They hadn't decided at this point. He was some sort of android, but his backstory was actually very different from what they wound up with later.
Yeah, that didn't really pop up until, we meet Lore as well, so...
Prior to Star Trek, he was again a stage actor in the 70s and had some small TV roles. He was probably working a bit more than some other people. He did have a reoccurring character on Night Court, and he was a acquitted murder suspect on Cheers in one episode, apparently.
Huh.
But he was
that one.
he was trained classically as a mime, and was pretty well known for being a comedic actor, which is one of the reasons that it was very surprising that he was cast in this emotionless robot.
Yes, though at times it does actually very much help him. He plays a perfect straight man.
Yes, he does incredibly well, but also just like unknown actor for TV purposes. Seems like a weird miscasting at first glance if you don't know everything that came after. This is like a weird thing with what lines up in this show.
Oh, sometimes, though, taking a chance on an unknown is going to create magic. Because, if they are a dedicated actor, if they're devoted to their craft, they're going to give you a damn good performance, even if they're, not someone that's a household name. And so you might not be getting people to the show via their celebrity or anything like that, but you're going to be generating a show that is high quality and thus gets a chance to make them into celebrity, which I guess happened here.
And so speaking of unknown actors, we now hit the best known actor from the time period, which is interesting to think about because, he's still a very well-known actor, but if you think about the time, it seems a little weird that he would be the best known actor from this show. Levar Burton playing Lieutenant Commander Jordy Laforge.
He starts off as sort of the helm officer, but eventually becomes the chief engineer after the first season, mainly because the chief engineers kept getting fired.
Yeah, they couldn't keep a chief engineer in the first season.
So maybe one of them lasted 2 episodes. I don't remember. We'll find out.
So apparently, Levar Burton is a natural-born actor, because he had basically no training, decided to audition for a film role, got his first ever audition, which brought him into the 1976 film Armos Man, and then...
Almost a Man?
Almost a Man? It's difficult to pronounce for me.
Yes.
Then he got a lot of critical fame and attention for playing Kunta Kinte in the miniseries Roots in 1977. And also was very famous at the time for hosting and producing the incredibly long-running PBS show Reading Rainbow.
Yes. Do they still make episodes of that?
I don't think traditionally. They've transitioned it a couple times into other formats. He, at some point, was able to get complete control over the rights to that and has since turned it into more of a multimedia empire. They have a podcast and I think a reading app at this point. And he's also doing some more adult versions of like reading podcasts and things. He's still very committed to the whole reading idea.
I'm cool on reading as a writer's of works to be read. So thank you, LeVar Burton.
growing up with completely undiagnosed dyslexia, reading Rainbow was my exposure to most books.
Yeah, I have trouble going through this, so thank you for helping me get the short version.
Mm-hmm.
And he was also on Fantasy Island. Yeah.
Everyone was, I guess.
A rite of passage for 70s, 80s.
Jordy Laforge was conceived as a blind character because even from early on, they wanted to have a member of the crew who had some sort of disability. And they hadn't dreamed up transportophobia yet. So they gave Laforge his famous visor to give someone a actual visible disability on the show, which is a good idea.
I believe the visor's like made out of a car filter and like a hairband or something like that. And for its look, it looks pretty good, actually. It's one of those things that became iconic from the series.
Very iconic. And I don't think it would have... They kept trying to transition him out of it. I don't know where I would put this in the timeline, because it's something that apparently they kept planning to do, was have him go through a surgery or something and get either replacement eyes or more normal-looking mechanical eyes like they did in the movies. And every time they were planning on it, they just got tons of letters from disabled fans saying, like, no, like, why do that? It's very important to have that kind of representation on this kind of show.
Yeah. He could be okay with himself and being different, So don't try to prod him too much into one direction or the other there. That's Jordy be Jordy. I remember, I think it's a season 2 episode, they actually sort of bring up the surgery option like explicitly. But most of the other times it's sort of more, we're just kind of thinking about it, fans. And the fans are like, no.
Yeah, it's a good idea on the thing. He just sees differently than people.
Mm-hmm.
Next, we've got Maria Sirtis, who plays Deanna Troi. She is an English actor, also working on stage for most of her career in England. Had several film roles in England in the 80s and some guest TV appearances. Did a few things in America, but not very much. Again, very unknown in America. She was originally auditioning to play the security chief at the time, who was not named Tasha Yar yet.
Yes.
She
unnamed security chief.
Yeah, she got, it was like Maria Gomez or something. They wanted a Latinx security chief, but that didn't work out with the casting. And she got pretty far into the auditioning process before someone was like, you know what, I think you would be better as the ship's counselor, which is where she wound up.
Well, that's good. Yeah, well, if you say so. And so she became the Betazoid character Deanna Troi. And if I recall, she was actually thinking about leaving the show early on. But Michelle Barrett's like, yeah, you seem kind of depressed. Let's go to a convention. And she's like, a what? And so they went to Star Trek convention, and she had like a really great time, and also was able to pay rent that month because she signed autographs. And so it's like, maybe this is worth it after all. All right, I'll just have to make sure I have time for this then.
Then someone who is only going to show up for the first season, unfortunately, we have Denise Crosby, who played Tasha Yar. She was in a showbiz family, being the granddaughter of Bing Crosby. She also had a lot of more minor film and TV roles, early role in Days of Our Lives, and was originally cast as Troi. This is the switcheroo. They had her cast as Troi, and they had Maria Sirtis cast as Tasha Yar, and they got into the audition process more and were like, I think we need to switch these two.
Yeah, I think Tasha Yar ends up being woefully underutilized in the series generally, but as far as sort of the core actor choices, I think this is actually a good decision they made there.
Yeah.
Because she definitely seems to fill the role fairly easily, even again if they don't give it much depth for her.
Yeah, and unfortunately, as we'll get into partway through the season, she definitely felt undervalued and did decide to leave the show during the first season when things were not going very well.
And so, alas, left Star Trek, never to be returned until a time travel episode.
Yeah, and now she's pretty well known for doing other things. She wrote, produced, and hosted the Star Trek fan film think it was called Fans now, or Trekkies. Now I'm having trouble remembering. I should have written it down, but it's pretty good documentary about the Star Trek fandom that I would recommend looking up.
Yes, she's in tons of things like Deep Impact and was in a couple episodes of The X-Files and NYPD Blue. Was also on Dexter and Jag and The Agency and even Family Guy. Star Trek Phase 2, she shows up, which, I guess we could talk about the whole thing there. Castle, Invasion, Roswell, there we go. She even shows up in things like video games, like XCOM 2. She's been in some stuff since then, and her time on Star Trek may have been limited, but she's still doing what she wants.
Works out. It also shows you just what a iconic cultural force this show is, that the person who had to leave during the first season because it wasn't going well still gets a bunch of name recognition off of having been associated with the show.
Indeed.
So next we've gone on to Gates McFadden, who plays Dr. Beverly Crusher. She was a choreographer, which I didn't actually know till I was researching this.
Yes, a choreographer, and so like the episodes where she's dancing, that's because she knows how to dance.
Yeah. Worked for the Jim Henson Company for a number of years as the director of choreography and puppet motion for Labyrinth and the Muppets Take Manhattan.
Oh, nice.
Which also makes me sad that they didn't include more Muppets in this show like they did in Farscape.
Well, there are a few critters of that sort, but we'll have to run into them on a sporadic basis.
And she was, of course, acting, did also like guest appearances in film and TV and things, but aside from behind-the-scenes work, also pretty unknown until Star Trek. Another one who only lasted for the first season, but then came back. Though this one wasn't her choice.
So there was some disagreements. I believe Maurice Hurley was involved there. I've heard several different stories, but one of them involves sexual harassment and things, so yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of different stories on this one and no definitive answers, unfortunately, for the historians amongst us. So
it would be nice to know the truth here, but at the moment it's hard to say what's up. But they could have been just or it could have been a much worse than that.
Rounding out the main bridge crew, we have Michael Dorn as Lieutenant Worf,
who has been a main character on 2 Star Trek series.
His original appearance, interestingly, was in Rocky as an uncredited bodyguard for Apollo Creed.
Well, if anyone's going to protect Apollo Creed, it would be Worf.
Was later on the show WEB, which I've never heard of, and then was cast as a regular on the show Chips. So he was one of the other better-known people because he was a main character on a different long-running popular TV show.
So Officer Jebediah Turner.
He very famously just got very Klingon-y in his audition to win the part immediately. One of the immediate castings, because he went in, didn't talk to anyone, stoically read his lines, and left.
Sir, we're being attacked. I suggest we fire phasers. Bye.
Worf's inclusion was thought of early on as well, because they wanted to show the continuity and advancement since the original series, when you had the Klingon War or Cold War, depending on which episode you're in.
Yes. Conflicts of some sort.
And it was kind of just more of an inclusivity idea. Like at this point, we've gotten beyond our conflicts to the era where a character that would have been an enemy in the original series is now a member of the main cast. Yeah, and for the first bit of the series, it's kind of ambiguous, are the Klingons part of the Federation now, or is he like a one-off sort of fella? And, it eventually gets resolved, but still, it's sort of like, it's like it's normal, and everyone's sort of like, it's the Klingon guy. He's the dude that never smiles, and, it's sort of not taken as unusual. Yeah, and they even sort of hadn't resolved the main Klingon storyline in the original series at this point, because Next Generation started to air before Undiscovered Country showed us the peace talk and start of the end of the Klingon War process that we have from the finalizing the story arcs of original series. Indeed. And so it's sort of like there's still sort of a lot of wiggle room as far as how things can sort of turn out as far as that's concerned. Maybe Klingons are nearly extinct and he's one of the last of his kind, or
maybe Klingons dominate a large section of the galaxy, and the Federation just like, yeah, we're just kind of cool with them. It's fine.
Yeah, since we don't get into a lot of the Klingon storylines and writing until like seasons 2 and 3, in the early series, he's basically the only Klingon we see for a while.
Yes, and he's, to a certain degree, almost, like the first season, almost like just an extra, almost. He has lines, but it's still very much he's subordinate to Tasha Yar, and is, and so a lot of the stuff that, later in the series he'd be doing, she's doing instead, and he's just kind of there hanging out on the bridge.
Yeah, well, early on, he and Jordy are basically doing the same kind of, like, front of ship sort of con officer job.
Yes. We're the miscellaneous people.
They're the two that they hadn't quite figured out what to do with at this point.
Indeed.
And speaking of people they didn't know what to do with, we round out our cast with Will Wheaton playing Wesley Crusher.
Yes, Will Wheaton, so he's gotten a lot of flack over the years for his role as a Wesley Crusher, and that's generally undeserved because he wasn't the one writing the show, guys.
Yeah.
But he's been in a ton of stuff since then, but yeah, it's still sort of, this is early times for him as far as
if you look back at it, he was an amazing actor even at the time. Like, he did a good job with what he was given. What he was given was insufferable.
Yeah. It's like, he was in Stand By Me. He was fantastic in Stand By Me. And then he became Wesley, and it's like, all right, well, you're kind of the Wonder Kid here, and Picard's telling you to shut up.
Yeah. So he was acting from a very early age. Around 9, he had his first role. He was also doing, like, early child acting voices. He was in The Secret of Nim.
Yes, it's Martin.
And I believe he was one of the characters in Last Starfighter. Forget who he was.
Yes, Lewis's friend.
Yeah. So, sub-character in Last Starfighter.
Yep.
And then gained a lot of fame, of course, by starring in Stand By Me, which came out in 1986, the same year they were casting and filming this show. Mm-hmm. The original concept was to have a relatable teen character who was going to be a young teen girl, because they felt that they had not really shown the development of a young teen girl, whereas there were innumerable stories of the development of young teen boys, but I guess they just decided they needed another one of those.
Yes. So he's not quite Charlie X sort of absurdities here, but it's Star Trek, and Roddenberry had a hand in it, and kids were involved, so something weird's going to be happening, and it will. And
given the way that they handled Wesley, I'm very glad that they went this direction, because if you miswrite a young teen boy character, it's not half as cringy.
Yes. So I guess we dodged a bullet? Question mark?
So despite his character being very unpopular, he was sort of the young audience POV character. I remember not hating him as much as a child.
Yeah, I sort of saw him as, all right, well, Wesley's here. Cool. Like, get me back to Picard.
Yeah, and he's not exactly that much smarter than any other kid on the ship. They're all doing calculus. Mm-hmm. Like, it makes sense that they have increased their level of education in this era.
Yeah, well, maybe they figured out a way to teach calculus so you don't have to have, like, basic arithmetic yet. All right, everyone, it's time to do our differential geometry. Can I just add numbers, Mom?
So, of course, Will Wheaton has since become a nerd culture icon. He's kind of leveraged his role on this show and name recognition in the kind of nerd community to be a, like, cultural force in the new kind of nerd fandom area, with a lot of YouTube content and, like, guest appearances on shows where he either plays himself or someone who, like, is not himself, but you know it's him.
Yes. Someone who's an echo of himself. I believe he was on The Big Bang Theory, was one of the ones people might remember most there.
Yeah, as an evil version of himself. And then he was a reoccurring hacker character in Leverage. Not playing himself per se, but definitely the same character as the evil version of himself that he plays in other things.
As you do.
But he's also been incredibly vocal about how bad it is to be a child actor, how he didn't want to be a child actor, and how all of the forced fame and things that he had from being a child actor, especially even on this series, which became very popular, was not very good, and he did not enjoy it, even though the cast of the show was nothing but friendly and supportive.
So, yeah, even in the best environment possible, it's still kind of hell for a kid, so yeah.
And now we can end on a downer.
A downer? What sort of downer?
Well, that was it.
Oh. But what about the most important individual in the entire history of the Federation ever? Chief O'Brien, played by Cole Meany.
Yeah, he's also around. He's not a named character yet.
Yeah, he does show up in Encounter the Farpoint, the pilot episode. So I wanted to bring him up here a little bit because that episode's probably going to be long enough for both of us. But he's someone who's once again did a few things before Star Trek, but after Star Trek really kind of picked things up. He was I guess in something called Les Roses de Dublin, which might have something to do with Ireland. I don't know. But since then, he's been kind of just working constantly, and he's still got stuff coming out. So
what's really interesting is he basically was a sub character. He was just like con officer, then transporter officer. And he even himself has said that he didn't realize his character was getting popular until one day he showed up, and instead of his lines having transporter officer next to them, they said Miles O'Brien.
Yes. Wait, I have a first name? When did this happen?
Yeah, he was one of those characters where they kept bringing him back because they liked the actor, and he was such a good actor that they eventually transitioned him into a named main character, who then, of course, went on to be a main bridge member cast on Deep Space Nine.
Indeed. So Encounter Farpoint, he was Battle Bridge Khan, Loli Mungus Security Guard 1, the Child Transporter Chief, and then that next couple episodes he was in. Then Unnatural Selection in 1989, so a couple years into the series, he was Chief Miles O'Brien, finally. And then he was that for the rest of the series. So yeah, it took him a few episodes.
And then I guess the last person that we should mention, who is also a seminal figure in Star Trek, is Majel Barrett, who, in addition to having a few guest appearances as Loxana Troi, Deanna Troi's mother, in this season and later seasons, one of the best reoccurring characters of Next Generation. She also is in this series a lot as the voice of the main computer.
Indeed. So, she's kind of in a good number of episodes, like over 100.
So we've talked about her before.
Number one
in the original pilot episode. Then
Nurse Chapel.
Yeah, in original series. Later, Doctor and Chief Medical Officer Chapel, and by the time you get to the movies.
So moved up into the world, and then transcended her character and become Loxana Troi, the Enterprise computer, and rolled on forever afterwards.
Yes, Enterprise computer, Loxana Troi in several episodes. So she's very, very involved in this. Not as much. She was in I think 2 episodes of Deep Space Nine.
Yes,
and was the computer on Voyager as well, because same computer. But then, of course, later got too old and failing health and couldn't continue on, and then eventually died in 2008.
Rest in peace. It is a little interesting, though, that she was number one in the original pilot of Star Trek, and then became the computer in the episode 1100101.
I think you're reaching, but
yes.
And that's our main cast until we transition a couple times. We'll have to do this again in later seasons because we do change out the cast a few times. Not very significantly, but we're going to get a couple of characters coming back, leaving, then coming back, new characters being brought in as main cast / semi-reoccurring cast.
So, Diana Muldaur there, we've talked about previously, will be Dr. Pulaski in the second season, but we'll talk about her more then.
Yes.
And there's also got, Ensign Rowe and Nurse Ogawa and Reginald Barclay. Almost said Charles Barkley.
And Guinan. Don't forget Guinan.
Yes, Guinan, who wanted to be on the series, and it's like, can I be in the series? And sure, come on. What do you want to be? Awesome.
She wanted to be in the series early on, and she might have been brought in for something in the first season, because she knew LeVar Burton from some other things they'd worked together on, and
yes,
she asked him to send the message to the higher-ups that she was interested in being on the show. And they thought it was a joke because she was an Academy Award-winning actor at this point. And they're like, why would someone like that want to be on our stupid little failing sci-fi show?
Well, I like Star Trek. Duh.
Well, we'll be able to talk about that more later on, of course.
True.
So,
but what about Tony Todd as Kern? He's in 3 episodes. Or Andreas Katsoulis as Commander Tobolak. He's in 4 episodes.
We're gonna get them all later when we get guest stars. Remember, this is the people who are going to be in every episode, so we have to talk about them now, so I don't have to spend 20 minutes reading every name at the start of every episode.
But what about Leonard Nimoy, who comes in and plays Spock for 2 episodes? Come on, Gepwin. We need to talk about all of them now. All right, I'll calm down.
The late 80s, early 90s, when the show was coming out, markedly different time to the 1960s when the show was originally conceived, original series. Because we are now at the far end of the Cold War.
Yes. Not in the middle, now near the end. Yeah.
To the point where it's basically going to be over within the first year or so of this show.
It's like, the Soviet Union's kind of looking to start reforming because, things are kind of not good there. So, we'll kind of, I guess we have to talk about other things other than the Cold War. What do we got?
Yeah, that's one of the problems that they had. But that's an interesting thing to look at with this era of Star Trek, with looking at Next Generation specifically, and then also moving into DS9, which we're not going to get to for a while, but as a kind of juxtaposition. Mm-hmm. Next Generation era Star Trek is peacetime Star Trek. This is probably written and produced during the most peaceful time in American history.
Yeah, where no big conflicts on the horizon. The big conflict we thought was going to happen probably isn't going to happen, or if it does, it's going to be over very quickly and everyone's going to be dead. So we don't have to worry about it so much. So we're just going to kind of enjoy living it up for a bit.
Yeah, the Cold War had been won. We're a few years away from any of our Middle Eastern conflicts. Even those were, not even at the time as well publicized as something like Vietnam. America was the dominant, unchallenged, unquestioned superpower at this point. Nothing can touch us. Our military can roll over anyone. We can do anything we want. What are we going to do about that? And that is the era and cultural context that the writers of this show have to deal with.
And so Gene and the writers were like, so what if we were just chill? What would that look like? How can we make it interesting?
There's 2 general main themes that run through this era of Star Trek. One is that it's a very peaceful era. We are a peaceful people. There's no major conflicts we have to deal with. Sometimes they come up, but even in Next Generation, they only last 2 or 3 episodes.
Yes. It's okay, so we're having a situation with the Romulans, and I guess we kind of resolved that, and we didn't enter a war, so hooray! Let's go about our business then.
The other particular thing that's going to keep coming up as we talk about this show is the Enterprise itself, largely the Federation generally, but we don't know as much about the Federation even in this era. They don't show up as often. But the Enterprise itself is a very stand-in for America, diverse crew, peaceful people, best of intentions. The most powerful ship ever conceived. They are essentially unchallengeable for the first season.
And the Enterprise is, basically the largest main ship we focused on in Star Trek to this day.
Yeah.
Deep Space Nine is technically bigger, but it's not a spaceship. It's a space station, so it's different stuff going on.
We do get challenges when we start introducing the Romulans later on. They have ships as big as the Enterprise, and you get to things like that where you can have standoffs again. But most of the time, even in the later seasons of the show, the Enterprise is unquestionably the most powerful thing you're going to encounter. The tension of the show does not come from we can be challenged on a military weapons level. It is a show about dealing with politics from a place of absolute power.
Yes. So what is doing the right thing given this level of power we have? We could abuse it, or we could try to do something a little bit more ethical here. We could try to resolve our problems without violence, and there might be a technical thing we have to sort out here to get around whatever difficulties we have, but we're going to figure out something here. And so it's not all technical plots, of course, but it's very much a, we're going to use our heads, not our fists here to sort our problems out.
Yes, and then, of course, now, having spent a lot of our lives in a post-9/11 world, when America feels vulnerable again, it's a weird thing to look at going back to the 80s, 90s, when you had to write stories from this kind of basically moral authority standpoint. We are the most powerful people in the galaxy. What does that mean about our obligations to others? What does that mean about how we get to unquestionably dictate terms if we want to? Like, how does that make us interact with other people who, arguably with our immense power, we could help, but we also can dictate policy and cultural influence and all kinds of things because we can be unquestionably unchallenged.
And so I think that's probably why discussions of the Prime Directive show up so much in TNG, even compared to like Voyager and things like that, where they're basically meeting something new every other week.
Yeah, so we're going to get into a lot more of the finer detail discussion as we go through episodes, because they change their stance on this a lot. There's some times where they unquestionably misapplied the Prime Directive and some other things, even according to their own rules.
So we'll sort that out then.
It's not something you really hit anymore, because even though we still do have a lot of unquestioned military power, America has never really felt this invulnerable again.
We're no longer riding as nearly as high as we thought we used to be. And some people are angry about that, but it's a matter of where we are at, And perhaps at the time, that feeling of invulnerability was not well-founded, because, the world is more complicated and, than we usually give it credit for. But, it was the feeling at the time. So where are you going to be writing from?
And then where we're coming from, I'm going to do my best to not bring too much nostalgia into this, but it's basically impossible.
Yes, this is the Star Trek we grew up with here.
Yeah, not only is this the Star Trek that I grew up with, this show started airing when I was so young. And my mother was such a Star Trek fan that she was, of course, watching it when I was a baby. I full-on do not remember a time of being introduced to this show.
It's something that has always been there for you.
Yeah, it just always existed.
For me, I wasn't quite that early, but I guess I became generally aware of it at some point. And then I realized, wait, this is actually really good. So by the time I was in middle school and high school, I would try to watch Star Trek whenever I could see it on. And I forget what channel it was, but every weekday at 10, they'd put on a TNG episode. And this is a problem when you're going to school and your parents want you to be in bed by 10, but it's like, oh yeah, I need to finish my homework. And so I make sure to not do my homework until 10 at night. So I can make sure to have Star Trek on at the same time. It's like, yeah, I'm not done. So I need to be up still. And sure, it kind of sucked in the next morning. It's like, all right, why are you waking me up at 6 a.m.? Ow. But it's still, it gave me sort of a break from the weird life I was living as a young person, but also was something that was a big anchor, I guess, as far as my routines went. And so I watched a good portion of the series at that point. Didn't catch every episode of that until later, but it's still sort of something that was a part of my life for a good number of years, and was kind of one of the biggest parts of my life. You could even say, there was other shows I was watching, especially when, Deep Space Nine started coming out, and I'm a big fan of Babylon 5 as well. And so those, sort of joined it all, as, along with TNG, when they were, starting up. But, it was still sort of the first part of that, sort of ensemble of things of sci-fi I really loved.
It's going to be really interesting having to go through. I'm looking forward to it, but in some ways I'm kind of terrified of having to bring trying to bring a unbiased eye to things. Because I will say, this show, probably more than any other early life experience for me, defined my sense of morality.
Yeah, and people wonder why millennials, have broken with a lot of the older generations on a number of moral stances. Star Trek, did you have something to do with this?
So we're going to have to look into what the show is actually saying. what subtextually it's saying, because that's often very different.
Mm-hmm.
And there's definitely some early episodes I'm not looking forward to covering based on how they handle race, sexuality, and gender.
Also, there's that case with the jewels out in it, that with the talking face, that freaks me out too.
Yeah, that's a weird one. Took me a while to figure out how they did that as a kid. I'm kind of ashamed of that now.
Yeah, it's just a process of opening up the hole of the transporter, but you don't think about that because the transporter seems like it's a fixed thing, not set. Yeah, Star Trek.
That's as much as we're going to go over right now, because anything else will just be repeating stuff that we're going to go over in individual episodes.
Yes. Though I guess this might be as good as time as any to talk about the ship itself real quick, if you got a moment.
That's true. So Uss Enterprise D.
It's big. Yes.
Technically the largest spacecraft ever devised for this series.
Yep. It's huge. Standard crew of like 1,000 plus people. I don't remember how many decks it has. It can separate into two large sections: the saucer and the engineering section. 2 warp nacelles, a tall warp reactor. The bit sort of on the engineering section, basically directly under the neck, and is actually like there's several decks where there's supposed to be just a giant deuterium tank. So if you want to blow up the Enterprise, that's one place to shoot. There is it runs off antimatter, interactions or annihilations and things like that in the warp core. But the antimatter itself is generated in various points across the ship, using, I guess, some sort of fusion reactor. I have the book, the blueprints, but I don't have them in front of me right now. In some iterations of what's been presented and people talk about, there may or may not be whales on board, which would imply that there's large sections of the ship that are actually giant, water tanks that contain these whales, and maybe a bunch of dolphins. I think they're mentioned once in the actual series, and just sort of past. It's like, hey, I want to show you the thing. It has holodecks, which are very much, like the recreation room for the animated series, but a lot more you can touch things, and there's food and water sometimes. But we can get more into that when we start having holodeck malfunctions too. Which has become a trope in Star Trek, but it wasn't quite yet at this point. There, is a captain's yacht, which is under the saucer section, but it's not really ever used.
Never used or
there
mentioned.
But it's supposedly there. It's a little circle bit there that sticks out the bottom. There's, shuttle bays, there's cargo bays, there's a 10 forward place, which is like the lounge / bar. There's numerous crew quarters. Once again, the blueprints actually point out to where everyone's quarters are, though sometimes those vary depending on what episode you're looking at too. So whatever. There is in the actual production of the show, they did build a number of corridors and rooms, and of course, because Magic at TV, it's like, all right, we just need part of this corridor, so we're not actually going to build a whole hall outside this particular door from sickbay. But we'll never go out that door, so it's fine. We'll have people go through that door, but we'll not take the camera through it. And I don't have it. I wasn't able to find it again, but I've seen a actual schematic of the set and how everything's sort of connected together, and what parts are movable and what have you. It's quite clever sort of illusions of television sort of stuff going on there. As far back to the ship, it has phasers, photon torpedoes, it got shields, and it's probably, as far as the various ships that show up in various Star Trek, probably the most temperamental of the starships we run into. Partially because the series did run for 7 seasons, so they were able to have lots of random tech plots. And it's like Deep Space Nine, early on there's a bunch of tech plots. It's like, yes, O'Brien needs to fix whatever here, and it's an important part of the plot. And then later it's like, all right, I guess I'm going to go fix this, and it's not really important to the plot, that sort of thing. So it becomes less of an issue there. In Voyager, there's occasional fix the ship sort of plots, but it's more I guess we're just going to come up with some new technology that we're never going to use again. And then that's our sort of technical, inoculation for this particular, bit of the season. But, in Next Generation, it's like, yes, the shields are failing and we have to go fix the things. And this is going to be kind of a critical ticking clock that we hope gets done ticking before this other ticking clock sort of strikes and all that. So it's the largest ship, but also, in as far as what we're showing, one that requires the most repair, which kind of makes sense because it is a massive structure. It is a massive ship. So you would think that of all the ones we're shown over the years, that it would be the one that would require the most maintenance. So it's a poor Jordy, in other words.
Yeah, I think that covers it well. I mean, every time they needed to write a episode that takes place exclusively on the ship, some part of the ship has to break to justify it.
Like disasters, like we ran into a space thing, and the ship's now, people can't get around because power is wonky, and we might explode, but everyone could be dead down below, so we need to make a moral decision up here in the bridge, while also you need to fix a problem in the cargo bay at the same time. And also, the warp core is going to go critical because for some reason no one's in engineering. But, everyone was... It was a day off, I guess.
Yeah.
People weren't going to work.
That's fine. Don't worry about it.
But yeah, that's sort of like one of the more iconic episodes there. But it is still sort of, it's like, all right, this is just so many things happening wrong at the same time. But yeah, it's like that.
And of course, we're going to get a chance to mention more of that as we go, because there's all of the holodeck episodes, which are excuses to use the Paramount backlot. Why do they keep using these things? Because they kill someone every time someone walks into the dang room. There's the weird exposed plasma junctions that you can just jump into.
Well, people use the holodeck. There's two general groups of people that use the holodeck. There's main cast members who use it to play, Dixon Hill detective novels, or there's people that use the holodeck for sex.
Yeah, you don't want to know how that breaks.
Those are the episodes they're not allowed to make on, an 80s TV here.
All right, so
we got lewd.
Well, we're going to get to that in like the second of our episodes, third episode overall. We hit the not safe for work stuff real early.
Oh dear.
Because
I'm scared.
Still that era of Star Trek. We still are trying to redo some of the original series stuff, which we'll talk about, because there are a lot of kind of like soft reboot original series episodes.
And Gene's still getting his porn made into a TV show.
Yeah.
So, So, anything else we need to sort of summarize overall?
I think that's most of it. We're going to get into other stuff as we go. I know we don't have a super active YouTube comments section, but either them there or the Discord, please do share your early Star Trek stuff from this era, because this is one where I think more people in our age bracket, this is like their Star Trek start discussions. We can all talk about things before we get to the next thing.
Yes.
We are going to cover the two-parter. As with other ones, we are probably going to do it in one episode because it doesn't make sense to split it up like that, which means it's going to be a lot of interesting stuff. But we are going to have to skip over a lot because most of it is character intros, and we've done a lot of that. So,
but also in Counter and Farpoint, like other than the Cube's plot, not much happens.
That is true. Yeah,
it's a lot of filler.
It's mostly character intros, which we've already done, so it's fine.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So yeah, next time we will get into actual Next Generation with the first ever Next Generation episode, The Encounter at Farpoint.
Next time on Watchers of Tomorrow, cue the pilot. You have been listening to Watchers of Tomorrow, a podcast on science fiction media. Find and follow Watchers of Tomorrow on Podbean, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, Spreader, Digital Podcast, and perhaps many more to come. If you enjoy our podcast, make sure to subscribe for more. And where possible, make sure to rate your experience or leave us a review. You may find Gepwin on youtube.com/Gepwin and Twitter @Gepwin. You may find me, Dr. Isix, on youtube.com/Dr. Isix and Twitter @IsixLP. Music is Waveform and Mori's Principle, both by DRKRN. You can also check out the Watchers of Tomorrow Discord channel. Make sure to share the experience with your friends, family, enemies, and alien overlords. If you feel you are suffering from transporter syndrome, please be aware that the next time you step off the transporter, that you, that is now, no longer exists.